Hi, I'm August Keller, and this is my review of Wolfman. So, I think Wolfman shows a lot of potential. It has a very well known premise, and it bolsters that with a lot of drama and themes about trauma, family, and fear. So, with trauma, it's considering how it's an infectious kind of thing and it can be passed down. There's like a cycle to it. Family, it's thinking about how it grounds us. Family grounds us. And fear, it's kind of considering how fear has this like law of attraction to it, like how the things we fear come to us if we allow them to. So that's all really good. That's kind of the kind of stuff I advocate for, taking a good premise and giving it all the substance. The characters have a lot of motivations. They have good relationships. The relationships are well established. They all have flaws. It's all developed very well before getting into the plot. The first act is almost all character work, and then the plot begins. And that's all stuff that, again, I really like to see. The protagonist evolves pretty steadily throughout. He starts one way, and then the plot kicks in, and his change is pretty gradual, and it all kind of culminates in a pretty worthwhile arc. I would say the arc felt satisfying to me. So again, good. But one thing that's holding this movie back is that while all that buildup is very effective, the story really starts to stagnate once the plot gets going. In the second and third act especially, there isn't really a lot of places for the plot to go. And that really kind of undermines the payoff, and the payoff really ends up feeling a little unsatisfying. Even though the arc it's good. It's a good arc, a good character arc, and it seems like it should really be effective. I think because the lead up to that arc, the rising action right before the climax starts to feel repetitive. I think it really kind of loses steam at like the worst time. So I'm very torn. It's like I find it very emotionally effective, but also the superficial stuff, the plot, which I usually care least about, really kind of weighs everything down and almost makes it a little boring at times, which I hate to say because I really admire a lot of what this movie's trying to do. And yeah, so the third act really kind of becomes cliche a little bit. Again, not the climax. The arc where everything kind of pivots and kind of comes together, that really I liked a lot. But everything leading right up to that, it kind of becomes cliche where it's just kind of starts to devolve into a generic almost monster movie. But again, the emotions come back to the forefront at the end, so I like that. The acting I found surprisingly internalized, which I really liked. I think that really elevated the material. Everyone's kind of conveying this layered range. There's a lot of intensity and internal conflicts. There's good chemistry. There's physicality, vulnerability. And it all kind of is understated, actually, which is I found very refreshing, especially for the horror genre. So yeah, all that is to say, I think Wolfman isn't. Unfortunately, the writing isn't really maximized, but it has a lot of enticing pieces in place. So, I liked it. I think it's just so close to being great that it feels a little like more unsatisfying than it should. I think it's almost like if it had just been a little bit worse technically, it might actually feel better in a way because it wouldn't feel so close to being great, if that makes sense. Technically, I think Wolfman really reaches for a personal perspective. It feels very intimate. And again, I don't know if it quite solidifies, but it's clearly going for that, and I admire that what it's going for. I think that's a really smart way to go for it. The imagery, the cinematography has a lot of these, like, it shifts back and forth between this subjective filter, and there's like this one sequence of surreal lighting that I really really liked. But unfortunately, besides that, I did find the imagery to be often too dark and drab. I think it's trying to do some play with the darkness a little bit, but I did find it to feel a little monotonous after a while. The editing really constructs a lot of tension and momentum early on, especially right up until the first turning point. But then again, I think the movie starts to run out of steam because, again, the story doesn't have a lot of places to go, so it starts to feel repetitive for a while there in like the middle to second half, and that's kind of unfortunate. The sound design I really liked a lot. I think it's very subjective and very intimate. It uses a lot of distortions, ambiance, like a lot of heightened ambiance, like with weather and nature sounds. There's action, and there's a lot of off screens where like you can tell things are happening on the other side of a wall or just off outside the frame. And that's really important, actually, not just for the character's emotion and for the mood, but for the literal plot. It's really driving the story. So I thought the sound was a real standout of this movie. The music is very appropriately atmospheric, and I like how it's restrained at like key moments where it's quiet and lets the emotions breathe. But I do think ultimately the music is forgettable. The production design establishes a lot of like scenic wilderness. There's a couple shots where it's very breathtaking, even a little bit. And I like how the horror genre elements are very grounded, and it kind of seems to be paying homage to the classic movie monsters, but not overly doing that, where it's like feels derivative. So that's all good, but unfortunately, I also found the production design to feel very confined. It's trying to be this chamber piece, but I think the setting, the house that they're set in, it doesn't really stand out in any kind of way. It doesn't really heighten anything, so it ends up just kind of feeling confined. The cast has a lot of up and comers, the two leads are up and comers in my opinion. I like both of them, the male and female lead, but at this point in time, they only have moderate fame, and I'm not sure how much more famous they will get, so it's hard for me to judge that. I think I like that this movie picked people that are on their way up, and maybe this will help them continue to rise, but I guess we'll have to see. The effects, the use a lot of makeup and prosthetics, which I appreciate. I like when the effects are practical rather than leaning on CGI, and they do a good job of evolving. So, the makeup is changing from scene to scene slowly and steadily, so to like signify his change as a character, and that's all very well done. It's not quite as prominent as I was expecting. I was hoping to see a little more body horror. I know that's kind of what this movie's going for, and it has decent body horror, good body horror, but I was hoping for more. So yeah, altogether, I think Wolfman is good when it could have been great. I hate to sound disappointed because I think this movie does a lot of good things right, and it's just so close to being really coming together and being much better. But it just feels like a lot of good pieces that needed something special to really elevate it, and I think it's just not quite there. So I liked the movie. I didn't love it, and I did have decent expectations going in, but yeah. I don't know if that's really a recommendation or not. I say if you're curious, go for it. Don't go in with too high of expectations. But yeah, it wasn't bad for sure. I'm satisfied. So yeah, that's all I have to say about that. If you like what I'm doing here, please feel free to like and subscribe. But at the very least, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time. Okay, thanks. Bye.